So, going to be looking at this book here. It's called The Wesleyan Missions of the Western Coast of Africa, and it is a biographical sketch. All the missionaries who have died in that important field of labor. And what I was saying before the mic was cut out, I was saying, hope everyone's having a good day, good evening, good afternoon. I said, all praises, all glory to the Most High. I said, it's not going to be a long one today. It's not going to be 2-3 hours. It's just going to be very quick, very concise, very minimalistic. Yeah. I just was coming across a few things today. And I thought, boy, okay, let me share a few things. So I'm just literally sharing a few things that I've came across today. So let me just make this a bit bigger so I don't burn out my eyes. So again, this is from the Wesleyan Missions, archive of the missionaries and their encounters and their documents. And it starts off with, or it doesn't start off with, but inside the book it says, the distinguishing peculiarities of the African nations may be summed into four heads, namely the character of complexion, hair, features, and figure. We have to remark that some with woolly hair and complexions of a deep black colour have fine forms. Listen to this description, because the description that we hear currently is like the polar opposite now, currently, the way the world's molded. But hear this. That some races with the woolly hair and complexion of a deep black colour have fine forms, regular and beautiful features, and are in their figure and countenance scarcely different from Europeans. Okay. Such as the Jolloffs near the Senegal, and the race of Kuher of the Hausa or Hossa, if I'm saying this incorrectly, Salaki. The interior of Sudan, some tribes of the South African race, as the darkest of the Kafars. That's an interesting word to put in there, is Kafars. Interesting. Are nearly of this description, as well as some families or tribes in the Empire of Congo, while others have more of the Negro character in their countenance and form. Other tribes have the form and features similar to those above described. Their complexion is black. Listen to this part, Listen to this. Their complexion is black. This is probably the only time I've seen it used in its correct context, but let's listen. Their complexion is black, or a deep olive. A deep olive. Usually when we hear olive, it's to talk about Mediterranean and Tasmanian and cranium, but this is talking about a Negro. Or copper color approaching to black. Interesting. While their hair, though often crisp and frizzled, is not the least woolly. Such are the Bisheri and the Dawakali and the Hazarota. I'm probably saying these incorrect, so lucky if I am. And the darkest of the Abyssinians, which I believe would be the Ethiopians, to my knowledge. Other instances have been mentioned in which the complexion is black and the features have the Negro type, while the nature of their hair deviates considerably and is even said to be rather long and in flowing ringlets. Let me just move that. Some of the tribes near the Sambesi are of this class. Among nations whose colour deviates towards a lighter hue, we find some who have woolly hair with a figure and feature approaching to the European. Such are the Buchanan Kafars of a light brown complexion, the tawny Hottentots, though not approaching the European, differ from the Negro. Again, some of the tribes on the Gold Coast and the Slave Coast and the Igbo and in the Bight of Benin are of a lighter complexion than many other Negroes, while their features are strongly marked with the peculiarities of that race. The notice is talking specifically about the Negroes. And we're going to come through and we're going to see a couple more texts as we go through, and it's making a distinction between Negroes and other tribes on the continent of Africa. It's just very interesting, very interesting. That's just the one quote that I came across, and I found it insightful. Wesleyan missionaries, John Wesley, I believe, the founder of the Wesleyans. John Wesleyan, there's another Wesley off the top of my head that I can't remember, you know. So that's them. And this is what the missionaries were writing down and archiving. This was a way to differentiate between the peculiarities of the African nations, maybe summed up in four heads, namely complexion, hair, features, and figure. Conquerors of the New World and their bondsmen, being a narrative of the principal events. So this is a narrative of the principal events which led to the Negro slavery in the West Indies and America. So this is going to give you an oversight, an insight into the events that took place. And this was compiled in 1842, London, William Bickering. All right, so let's read what it says. The Negro Prince had formerly alleged that one of his reasons for not becoming a Christian. Now, when we see the word Christian in this context, it's talking about Catholicism. So the Negro Prince had formerly alleged that one of his reasons for not becoming a Catholic was the fear of disgusting, his followers. But being in Portugal, that reason no longer holds good, and he now becomes a convert and is baptized as Don John Biomin, King John being his godfather. 24 of Biomin's gentlemen received baptism after him. This is the account of his reception. So we know again, this is he became associated with the Catholic Church, and he was baptized. Now, in the Catholic Church, their baptism isn't submersion, it's sprinkling. So he was sprinkled, that's what they do. They do these like sprinkle on their head, that kind of stuff. So he was sprinkled, and he accepted the Catholic faith when he was on the land mass of Portugal. But he was trying to avoid becoming a Catholic, because he said, you know what? What did he say? Allegedly, one of his reasons for not becoming a Christian was the fear of disgusting his followers. So he didn't want to become a Catholic because he didn't want to upset his followers. But because he was on the landmass of Portugal at this particular time, that reason had no weight to it. So we decided to convert, and he had his name changed and this, that, and the other. So that's just that one article. Then I got this other article here that goes into it in a bit more detail. Same guy again. Bemoin was received magnificently by King John of Portugal. The Negro Prince had formerly alleged that one of his reasons for not becoming a Christian was the fear of disgusting his followers. But being in Portugal, that reason no longer held good, and he became a convert, being baptized as Don John Bemoin, having King John for a godfather. Now, I've always wondered where this godfather thing comes from, because I don't see it in the Bible. Yeah, but everyone wants to be a godfather, and everybody wants to be a godmother, and everybody wants to be a god sister and a god brother. And I'm always like, where's this god thing, godmother, god daddy, god granddaddy came from or come from, But it must be a Catholic thing that now everybody practices and does. So he converted, was baptized. The king happened to be his godfather. This is the account of the reception, because he was a man of a large size. The guy, Bemoin, he was a man of a large size, fine presence, about 40 years old, with a long and well-arranged beard, appeared indeed not like a barbarous pagan, but as one of our own princes, to whom all honor and reverence. Yeah, so he looked regal and he looked the part. Now let's find out more about this interesting character. Hopefully the mic's still working. Mic check, 1 2 1 2. Yeah, hopefully it's still working. Every time I change slide, it seems to not work. But this is the crash course. We've been through a lot of these in previous studies, especially the expulsion or the banishment of the Jews from Portugal. But this is kind of like we're going to look at the missionary element in a little bit more detail. Yeah, but it's not going to be a long study. I'm looking to wrap this up in under 40 minutes. So it's not going to be long. I'm just sharing a few thoughts. So the story of B. Mowin is interesting. Not that it carries forward the history much, but it and other such narratives show that there were temper, manners, and views of Europeans and Africans towards each other, and indicates what might have been made out of the intercourse. King John II was more successful. I need to zoom this up because it's so small on my screen. All right. King John II was more successful in converting the inhabitants of Congo than of Jaloff, the ambassador from Congo. Having spent 2 years at Lisbon, during which his attendants learnt the Portuguese language and were instructed in Christian doctrine, so this would have been Catholicism, was sent back to his own country with 3 Portuguese vessels. The Portuguese were well received. Mass, here we go, implying that it was a Catholic religion, was performed in the midst of thousands of Negroes. A church was built, and the King of Congo became Christian, Catholic, and took the name of John. He took the name of John. Oh, these things keep popping up. All right. Where was I? He took the name of John. Where's that? Okay, took the name of John. He had occasion at that time to make war against a neighboring people, and sallying forth with a cross depicted on his banner, he was victorious. After this, the Portuguese expedition, which really seems to have come out for no other purpose than to introduce Christianity into the Congo, returned leaving persons capable of continuing the teaching of Catholicism. Yeah. Now the background story, I don't want to say incorrectly, but research it for yourself. He went to Portugal because he was having a feud with another neighboring nation, and he wanted some support from Portugal to help them. And he was received, as it says, with respect by the king. And then while he was on their landmass, he'd always made the excuse that he's not going to conform to the religion because he didn't want his followers to be upset with him. But then when he ventured onto their landmass, it was open gain. And he's like, okay, so why don't you want to join the religion now, join the crew, join the clique, join the gang? And he was like, oh, okay, I might as well because Then he joined, got baptized. The people that were with him, they got baptized or sprinkled. Yeah. Then he goes back to the Congo with, was it 3 vessels? So he came with a convoy of Portuguese. They do mass in front of a multitude of Negroes, something that they've never seen before. They've never seen this Catholic practice of mass before. They're intrigued. Then it says, what happened? After this, the Portuguese expedition, which really seems to have come out for no other purpose than to introduce Catholicism into the Congo, returned. So some of them went back, but they left persons capable of continuing the doctrine or the indoctrination. That makes sense. And we're going to see how all this links in to missionary and the historical role of a missionary. Yeah. So I know when we hear missionary today, we have a certain concept of a missionary, but I want to show you the historical role of a missionary, because if we're gonna say something, then like Yeshua doesn't say go and make missionaries. He says go and make what? Disciples. Now I know people will say, well, disciple missionary is just another word for saying make disciples. Okay, but I'm saying let's look at the foundation. Let's look at the history of everything. What's the history of missionary? Yeah, so let's expound on this a little. Like I said, I'm aiming to finish real quick. I'm just gonna be a very quick crash course. So everyone saying one, that's perfect. All praises, all glory to the Most High. We can continue on. So we've looked at that, and we're gonna go a bit further on this particular story. So he was trained where, and yeah, so let's answer that question. He was trained where. This Portuguese prince or member of nobility, he was trained in Portugal. He learned the language, he learned the doctrines, he learned everything that was to do with Catholicism, and then he returned, him and his newly baptized comrades returned back to the Congo, and they didn't come by themselves. They came with some Portuguese locals, and they did a massive mass. Loads of people were there in attendance, spectating, you know, and the people that came with him went back, but then some people stayed so that they could teach the rest of the doctrine to the rest of the people. Okay, well, no question on that one. And he sent his children where to be educated. This is the question we want to look at now. So let's see how this all links in and plays a part. The book is Life of Columbus by Arthur Helps. Let's see what he's saying. So, the younger son and the other was disinherited. On the death of the old monarch, the younger son suddenly attacked the other, who had only about him 37 followers. So what's happening now is the two sons, the dad's dying, and there's these two sons. One son wants to continue Catholicism, and the other son doesn't want to continue Catholicism, and they're gonna clash. Yeah. So the younger son and the other was disinherited on the death of the old monarch. Yeah. The younger son suddenly attacked the other, who had only about him 37 followers. So the younger's attacking the older, and the older only has a small entourage of 37 followers. Yeah? 37 followers, Portuguese and Negroes. He has a combination of Portuguese and Negroes in his entourage. However, under the Christian banner, and probably with some little aid of Christian discipline, I like the way it says that, the elder vanquished his younger brother with all his host, became king, and did his best to establish Christianity or Catholicism throughout his kingdom, or sorry, his dominions. Now it says, the king of Congo, this new king, reigned 50 years. He was not only a warm favorer of Christianity, but himself an active preacher, having qualified himself by learning the Portuguese language and studying the scriptures. He sent his children and grandchildren over to Portugal, had them well taught both in Latin and Portuguese. And of his own lineage, there were 2 bishops in his kingdom. Barros tells us that all these things were done at the expense of the kings of Portugal. So the king in Portugal financed this king's lifestyle or education. Well, we know he sent his children and grandchildren to Portugal. So I guess that's what he's talking about. Like the king in Portugal, between them, sponsored it, etc., etc. Let's read it again. So, the king of Congo reigned 50 years. He was not only a warm favor of Christianity, but himself an active preacher, having qualified himself by learning the Portuguese language and studying the scriptures. He sent his children and grandchildren over to Portugal, had them well taught both in Latin and Portuguese, and of his own lineage, there were 2 bishops in his kingdom. Barros tells us that all these things were done at the expense of the kings of Portugal. A very noble work it was of theirs, and in the present state of that kingdom, these are the works which may console the Portuguese nation and their rulers with a not unbecoming recollection of past greatness, and perhaps reanimate them to great deeds again. All right, a lot to say. Very quickly though, King of Congo is enchanted by this religion of Catholicism. It's different, you know, marginally introduced to it by his pops. Pops kicked it. 2 brothers fight over the throne. The one brother who's not really interested in it loses. The son who is interested in it wins and begins to propagate the religion in the Congo. Not only that, but he sends his children and grandchildren to Portugal to get that Western education. Sends them from Africa to get that Western education. And we always do this. We always send our children to a Western institute to get educated, and then our children just come out as an educated fool. PhD, permanent head damage. Is that what someone said? PhD, permanent head damage. Made me laugh. But yeah, man, that's what happens. We just say, yo, there's no point educating our children in Jamaica. The education's poor. We need to send them to America or to England or wherever. But it just can't be where we are. And that's what he did. He sent them away and X, Y, and Z. But I like the way it says that all this was funded or supported by the Portuguese state. And if we go back again, one more slide, it says, after this, the Portuguese expedition, which really seems to have come out for no other purpose than to introduce Christianity or Catholicism into the Congo, returned, leaving persons capable of continuing the doctrine of Catholicism. Okay. Like I said, won't be long. Let's skip through. Now, we know what happened in 1492 or 1442. 1442, 1492, a lot of weird events were taking place. So Gonzalez was the first Portuguese who in 1442 returned with Negro slaves purchased instead of Africans, who had till then been carried off by mere force. But soon after the Portuguese became better acquainted with the African regions and valuable productions, question, how do you think they became better acquainted with the African regions? It was by the missionaries. The missionaries were like your modern day James Bond, like doing all that reconnaissance, getting in there, befriending people, surveillance, reconnaissance, all those kind of things is what the missionaries were there to do. They were missionaries on a mission to civilize. But we'll see this in their own words as we go through. Now, what's very interesting, let me finish reading. Prince Henry founded the first Guinea company that netted factories in the fortresses of Arguin and got the exclusive privilege of trading with the Arabs. So Prince Henry founded the first Guinea company that netted factories in the fortresses or the fortress of Arguin and got the exclusive privilege of trading with the Arabs. So this is Prince Henry, a Portuguese guy. He set up a factory in a particular place, and he also got the privilege of trading the slaves with the Arabs. Yeah. Now, what's very interesting about this particular guy is Prince Henry's full name is Infante Dom Henrique of Portugal, the Duke of Viseu. And if I'm saying these names incorrect, I apologize. It's late, half asleep, half tired. No excuse, but it is what it is. But he was better known as Prince Henry the Navigator. Infantidom Henrique o Navegador, was a central figure in the early days of the Portuguese Empire and in the 15th century European maritime. And interestingly, when you go in the Bible, yeah, when it talks about Japheth and the descendants of Japheth, it calls him the maritime people. Yeah. Discoveries and maritime expansion. Through his administrative direction, he is regarded as the main initiator of what would be known as the age of discovery. I'd call that the age of colonization. Henry was the fourth child of the Portuguese king John I, who founded the House of Avis. Now, 1 second. Let me just find something quickly. Okay, back. So in Genesis 10, verse 5, some versions will say the maritime people, and some versions will say the isles. Yeah, so Genesis 10:5 says these were the isles of the Gentiles. Some versions will say this was the maritime place. What does some versions say? The maritime people separated or whatever. Yeah, some things say that, some things say other. But okay, just to give you a understanding on that. Yeah. So this guy is called Duke of Viseu. What else did he say? Maritime, this, that, and the other. Okay. So he was known as a duke. And who did he trade with? He traded with the what? The Arabs. So we see a confederacy of dukes and Arabs, Arabs and dukes on the continent of Europe. Interesting. Let's continue though, because we're just dealing with the missionary element in particularly. So here we are now. Another quote from the Wesleyan missions. Like I said, Wesleyan's a Christian organization, Christian church, a byproduct of John Wesley, and I can't remember his brother's name. But let's see what this quote says here from the Wesleyan. It says, But though the trade in gold and slaves was the principal object the Portuguese had in view in exploring the west coast of Africa, they did not omit to introduce and inculcate the principles of their religion. Let's read that again. But though the trade in gold and slaves was the principal object, so the principal thing that they were doing was, selling gold and slaves, the Portuguese had in view in exploring the west coast of Africa. Now, what did they have in view? They did not omit, so they did not stop, or they didn't prevent to introduce and inculcate the principles of their religion. So, yeah, they were going there to trade gold and slaves, but they were also going there to civilize. They were going there to civilize. Another synonym for being a missionary is going to civilize. You're going to civilize these uncivilized people. They might eat they might eat with their hands. So we need to give them a knife and fork. They might drink out of a jug, so we need to get them to drink out of a glass. So another clandestine word for a missionary back in the colonial period was a civilizer. Now, just read that again. But though the trade in gold and slaves was the principal object the Portuguese had in view in exploring the west coast of Africa, they did not omit to introduce and inculcate the principles of their religion. So the main thing was gold and slaves, but after that, it was to civilize, whitewashing, supremacy, all that kind of jazz. Let's continue. Now, black missionaries were trained to teach the continent. Black missionaries were purposefully trained. So let's backpedal a little. Well, we fast forwarded a lot. So we've got to the time of the, slavery in America, slaves being emancipated slowly. What was the purpose of emancipating a slave? Or what was not even the purpose of emancipating a slave. What's the purpose of teaching a slave? What was the point in having a pastor on a plantation? What was the point in educating a pastor to pastor status? Was it Was it to preach against sin, or was it to uphold sinful institutions by giving them theology and eschatology and hermeneutics and all these nice fancy words of saying this is how you're supposed to study the Bible? Yeah. So let's read from African Repository, American Colonization Society. So it says this was the strategy. So we've looked at how a king gets caught off guard, baptizes not just himself but his comrades. They get sprinkled by the Catholic Church, go home, they do a mass. Everyone's interested, intrigued. They've never seen it before. They've probably never even seen people of that persuasion before. Who knows? Just speculating. So it's all new, and most people like to do new things. One of the sons is not really on it. The other son is very much on it, very zealous for this new style of practice. He defeats his brother, continues the practice, and that's what we saw. So we saw how, oh, and also that one who won the battle sent his own children and grandchildren to be educated so that they can come back to educate others. Yeah. Now we're going to see the same kind of mindset, the same kind of system, you know. So it says the honored instruments, the honored instruments. It says white missionaries cannot evangelize Africa. Okay. The country is so vast in extent, the population is so great, the manners and customs, as well as the habits of thought of the natives, are so different from us. And withal, the climate is so hostile to whites, and comparatively so congenial to blacks, that Christianized colored members from America seem to be selected as the honored instruments for the elevation of the continent. So this is saying we can't go there because the environment is too combative, it's too hostile for us to do what we need to do there. But it's like by the Most High's providence, it's suitable for the Negro. I mean, that doesn't even make sense. You've taken them from there, so obviously it would be suitable for the Negro. But you know, ignorance knows no bounds. They're saying it's uninhabitable for us, uninhabitable for us. But for these guys, it seems to be convenient. So in a weird way, these are the honored instruments for the elevation of the continent. The elevation, interesting. We see this. We see in the language supremacy, elevation. They need to come up to our level because they're down. Then it says, foreigners, referring to themselves, may lay the foundations, but the educated and sanctified Negro, he needs to be educated, PhD, and sanctified Negro, immigrant with energy and power, charisma. Like we looked at this the other day for Sabbath, how they like to choose people with charisma and energy and dynamos and all that kind of stuff to be the salesmen of their particular movement. And power must rear the fabric, which shall be a national monument and an index of the nation's progress. Interesting. And to this day, this same framework hasn't changed, you know. Hasn't changed at all. Most American pastors of theology or doctors of theology, they're educated in America, and then they get sent to the continent of Africa to win souls for the Methodist Church, the Lutheran Church, the Adventist Church, the Latter-day Saints Church, the Jehovah's Witness Church. So they get trained in the continent of Europe to then win souls in the continent of Africa. Interesting. And I got these two images here so you can see. So missionaries are there to train into this into this theology of elevation, supremacy, and they train up. They get their people trained up, and they send their people to do what they would love to do, but they're unable to do because of the constraints, you know. And we're gonna see more. We're gonna see them say even more stuff on the next slide. So this is from the Education of the West, a formative chapter in the history of civilization. You know, to have a civilization, you got to bring a religion, or you got to bring certain mores and culture and things of that nature. So let's find out who was to run the schools. What were Negro preachers' main assignment? And what was the other question? Where were they sent to? So who was to run these schools? Obviously, when we read, you'll find out what I'm talking about. What were Negro preachers' main assignment? So what was their main task? And where were they sent? And this book is called The Education of the West. The Education of the West. Got all these pop-ups coming. Do apologize. Hope everyone's had a good day so far. Hope everyone's having a blessed day, evening, whatever it is, you know. All right, so that's popped up now. Good to go. So what I'm trying to show by this short study is how nothing's really changed, you know. Nothing's really changed, and I'm just trying to hopefully show you that we need to kind of come out of this mindset of lethargy. Like we need to, we're the most studies, we're the most studied group on the face of the earth, but yet we've yet to study ourselves. There's so many books written about our achievements, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats. You know, the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. There's archives, there's history books, there's so much stuff written about us. But when you talk to the average person who looks like us and you ask them about their history, they can just tell you, oh, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Marcus Harvey, you know, not even Garvey. Or they'll tell you about Al Sharpton and Larry Alder. You know what I'm saying? Like, as a people, everybody knows our history. You'd be surprised how many people know your history intricately and diligently, because they have to. They have to stay 1 step, 5 step, 10 steps ahead of you. So when you're on level 2, they're on level 5, thinking, okay, they're catching me up. Let me throw this spanner in the work. Yeah, but we're yet to understand our own history of who we are, how we got here. Why are we like we're so far behind? We need to start catching up, and we need to understand our own mind and why we think and why we act, why we respond, and why we process certain things in certain ways. All right, then let's continue. So, what's this? Another factor that needs a good deal of investigation is the policy of American societies in sending Negro missionaries to Liberia on the theory that blacks could stand up better under the rigors of the African climate than could white men. In the 1830s and the 1840s, highly qualified white missionaries were sent to conduct the schools in Liberia. Interesting. Many of them had especially trained for missionary work through the study of classics. Classics, you know. The study of the classics. That's when you know it's just straight folly. The study of the classics. I'm not going to get into that. If you know what it is, you know what. If you know what it is, you know what the time is. If you don't know what it is, then you don't know what the time is. But yeah, the classics. Okay. And theology. At Princeton Theological Seminary, and have been sent out by the Western Foreign Missionary Society or by the Presbyterian Board of Foreign Missions. Remember we looked at Presbyterian the other day? It was founded by John Knox, but then they went on to then produce the KKK. Interesting. And now you're sending out foreign missions to peddle white supremacy under the auspices of white Jesus, but that's another story for another day. Let's stay on topic. By 1850, By 1850, actually, I want to share one more thing in that actual passage. It says another factor that needs a good deal of investigation is the policy of American societies, in sending Negro missionaries to Liberia on the theory that blacks could stand up under the rigors of the African climate. Than could white men. Now listen to this part now. It's saying in 1830s, 1840s, highly qualified white missionaries were sent to conduct schools in Liberia. So they weren't doing the missionary element. The black people are doing the missionary work, the Negroes. They're going out there saying, come to my church, come to my church, come to the church, come to the church, come to my church. And then when they go to the church, the people who are running the school are the white folk. So that it's like a handler, handler. Like we looked at the Pentecostal church, the foundation of the Pentecostal church. We looked at that on Sabbath with Seymour and how, you know, how that went down. We're seeing the same, it's like the same history, the same tactics. There's a saying, a true saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And this system just seems to work how it is. So, they don't need to remix it because it's not broke, so don't fix it. They've kind of mastered their thing. They've solidified it, codified it. We're just playing keep up, catch up. By 1850, the number of highly trained white missionaries began to decline as the number of qualified black missionaries became available to pick up the main burden of the work during the second half of the century. Perhaps more important than the colour of the missionaries or their training was the fact that the effort of the American missionaries was less broadly humanitarian. So the effort of these missionaries wasn't to help people physically to improve their quality of life and their well-being. Yeah, it was. Let's read it again. Perhaps more important than the colour of the missionaries or their training was the fact that the effort of the American missionaries was less broadly humanitarian, intended to improve the quality of life for the general population, and more narrowly focused on training American, Liberian blacks to become Christian missionaries to spread the gospel in Liberia. They wanted skin folk to go amongst skin folk and soften the ground so that they can come in and educate us. But check this though, they sent out Negroes with a Western mind, and they just couldn't assimilate with their brethren on the continent. They had this Willie Lynch mindset of we're Americanized and you're Africanized. Check this. The lack of rapport between the blacks imported from America and the blacks of the villages of Liberia made it clear that there was no automatic bond of color that could surmount the differences in culture. So you had a Colton Banks or a Uncle Ruckus preacher amongst these folk, and they just couldn't. There was no synergy. There was no harmony. Interesting. 2 more slides and I'm literally done. Told you it wasn't long today. Now, this is an interesting one that I came across. Colonial Church Chronicle, the Foreign Ecclesiastical Reporter in 1864. It says, the measure of his needs. The Negro is really industrious. He, like other men do, English poor, Irish poor, German is never half finished, broken ori, incomplete, in artifact. When he plants, he does it earnestly, thoroughly. Whatever he does with energy according to the traditional or the traditions of his country. Yeah. Now, some of these words and how they're articulated on these documents are hard to read. I was reading this one here. The one, oh, where's my arrow? Let me read the top one though. Where's my arrow? Man, got no arrow. All right, let me read it from the top. I was reading the side one, where it looks like, got no arrow. All right, let me just read it anyway. I'll read it again. The measure of his needs. The Negro is really industrious. He behind like other men. He's behind like other men do. I don't understand the wording, but anyway, it says he is behind like other men do. English is poor, so the Englishman is very lacking in industrial skills. The Irishman is very lacking in industrial skills. The German man gets thing is always half finished, broken or awry or incomplete. And then it says, but when the Negro does it, it's always perfect. When he plants, he does it earnestly and thoroughly. Whatever he does with his energy according to the traditions of his country. Yeah, and this made me laugh because when the UK, or more specifically when London, England, was getting bombed, so England was getting bombed by our German cousins. Yeah, you had the Irish, here, the Welsh here, the Scottish were even here. Everyone's beefing. Europeans are having beef. Dukes versus Dukes. Germany's bombing the life out of England. Who did they call upon to come and build the country after all that commotion and pandemonium was going on? Who did they seek for? Who did they call out to? Did they not go to their former colony in Jamaica, where they reached out to their former colonized, enslaved Jamaicans and said, hey, can you guys help us to rebuild our country? And incidentally, that's how my family arrived into England and how I'm in England today. But you see how they reached out to a particular people because they knew they'd do a particular job. Yeah, there's economic factors involved. They could underpay them and lower wages for immigrants and all that kind of stuff. But the work ethic and the work quality was second to none. You with me? Interesting. All right, last slide and we're done. Now, I put this on my community wall. Apologies if I'm sounding sluggish. I'm kind of tired now, so I'm going to lock off. On the community wall, I said, before you even got out of the plantation, as you slowly being emancipated, your mentality or your worship or your religious framework was being decided by the Anthropological Society of London. Covered this before in a previous study. This is a very condensed, shortened version. So before you even stepped off that plantation and you're thinking, yeah, man, I'm free physically and I'm free spiritually and I'm free mentally and I'm going to be free to choose what I want to do. No. You got children. Like, I've got children, yeah? And I say to my daughter all the time, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. I just drop these seeds, prophesy over them like, yo, you're going to be a doctor. Like, talk life, talk, speak life into their life. Give them something to aim for. So I say, yeah, man, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. Sowing them seeds. Now, seeds were being sown to us in terms of what religious institute we should subscribe to. Yeah. Now, this is the conversation that was taking place behind the scenes before, people could decide what was going to go on and how they were going to conduct themselves. So let's just read the quote and it will make more sense. So it says, Mohammedanism or Christianity. Mohammedanism or Christianity. Mohammedanism is Islam. It was called Mohammedanism back in the day. And Christianity can be Pentecostal, can be Protestant or can be Catholic, So it says, the Anthropological Society of London, the youngest and most pretentious of the so-called scientific studies. Let's read that again. The Anthropological Society of London, the youngest and the most pretentious of so-called scientific societies of England, has lately been discussing the question of whether Mohammedanism or Christianity is better suited for the civilization, and here's that word again, elevation of the African race. Mr. W. Winwood Reade, the author of Savage Africa, some time ago read a paper justifying Mohammedanism, polygamy, and slavery, and as a matter of course, condemning Christian missions as Christianity was altogether unsuited to the Negro, whom it only made worse than he was when in a pagan state. He was supported in his view by Captain Burton, the Traveller, African Repository by American Colonization Society, publication date 1865. So these guys are saying, boy, when these guys get emancipated proper and they get a bit of autonomy, a bit of independence, but we're still micromanaging, which religion do we want them to go down? Like, which religion is less of a threat? Which religion can I capitalize on? Which religion? Do I want them to be a Malcolm X, or do I want them to be a Martin Luther King? Now that was it. Very short, very sweet, man. I just wanted to share that very quickly.